gentlemen, thanks for making time. As you can hear in the background, there's some noise going on. There's a lot of action and din. That's what they call the din in the background.
Is there a conference going on? Where are we recording?
Is that what all those people are doing here? I thought they were here to see us.
I was going to ask them later.
Let's just bring those a little bit closer.
Fair enough.
There you go. Like, don't chew on it, but you want to make. Yeah, there's good.
Okay.
Tom and Raine, not the first time either of you have been on the show. So you guys we call it friends of the show.
Alumni.
Alumni.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Does that mean we have to give money?
Yeah,
he's going to ask.
We are
going to give.
We'll put you on a drip campaign. We'll drop you an email every couple of weeks and say, listen, you guys have supported others, and now you have to support people like you.
Pay it forward.
We'll send you a mug every once in a while. So we're talking about something that gets mentioned a lot, and it's going to relate to both of you in different ways. And I like these. I like connections that don't look like they make sense forwards, but do backwards. So Raine, we'll start with you. You did research. You're a research guy. And you did you looked into something that people mention in hallways at CSM. People have conversations. People throw out these terms that get used so much, they kind of become cliches because they get used so much. And that's lifelong learning. We're all lifelong learners. We say that. But then a researcher goes, you stroke your chin and go, what's that mean? And is it good? Is it good? And how good? And how do we know? So you looked into that because it is something that is sort of in the ether within our profession. What'd you find? What'd you research? Where'd it bring you?
Yeah, no. So yeah, we looked at, and really one of the terms that's being used a lot now is this idea of a master adaptive learner, which puts a little bit more framework to the sort of like, what does that mean, lifelong learning? And one of the things, and we'll keep calling it lifelong learning because it's easier to say, but one of the things that model provides for us is some characteristics of what makes someone lifelong learner. What are the characteristics?
Right.
So things like resilience, a growth mindset, curiosity, like sort of an internal motivation to learn. And so what we did is we used that model to look at the characteristics of rehab professionals, so PTs, OTs, speech language pathologists, in several large organizations around the country. And we looked at when you have individuals, rehab professionals who have these characteristics, how does that interact with the environment that they're in? And are they in a good learning environment? And then what are the effects of that on things like career satisfaction and intention to stay with that organization? And we also used in our model we call them filters because it's kind of like you're filtering the effects through something. Research-wise, they're mediators, right? But we look at it, so you have the effects of the environment, you have the effects of just the characteristics of the individual, the person. Then they come together, and how do those things, they get influenced by things like professional engagement and organizational engagement. Well, so what we found was that the higher characteristics of lifelong learning that you had, you actually were, less satisfied as like career satisfaction in our model, which at first we were like,
yeah, wait,
what does this mean?
That feels opposite.
Right?
Okay, that's not good.
And then we looked at it and said, okay, well our model of career satisfaction was asking questions about things like career advancement, learning new skills, and things like that. And so you're like, okay, well this kind of makes sense because these people are driven, right? They're lifelong learners. They're driven. They're always looking for more. And so their natural state of being satisfied with where they are is less.
Lean forward, right.
Yeah. And so we're like, okay, that makes sense. And then we saw that, these individuals also had less intention to stay with their organization. And so we're like, okay, well, what does that mean? And so we're kind of looking at some of the data. We're like, oh, well, that actually makes sense as well because they're going to go where the opportunity is.
If they feel like they hit a ceiling, they're going to go, great, well, I'm going to break through that.
Exactly. And so then what really supported that model was when we looked at organizational engagement as a mediator. And what we found is that when those individuals were engaged in their organization, it sort of negated that
desire to leave?
Desire to leave. They were more satisfied. They were less likely to leave because they were getting their needs met at that organization.
What are the ways that organizations can do that? Like, what are some examples? Because you looked across a couple different large organizations.
Yeah, and what we found is the biggest driver of really all of those things, career satisfaction, so independently career satisfaction, independently intention to stay, and independently organizational engagement, we found that meeting basic psychological needs. So self-determination theory, is where this kind of comes from.
Right.
And it talks about people have 3 basic needs that motivate them.
Okay.
One is the need for autonomy. People want to feel like they have choice in what they do.
Got it.
The need for competency. They want to feel like they're good at doing it. And then 3 is relatedness, that by doing whatever it is, that they're a part of something bigger than themselves. And so when people were in environments where those psychological needs were more met, they had higher engagement, which then made them more satisfied with their career and more likely to stay with that organization.
Are you familiar with ikigai?
I'm not.
So just Japanese theory of your sense of purpose. The 3 things you mentioned, there's just 1 4 missing in ikigai. And of course, it's like Japanese. It's very symmetrical. It's a Venn diagram of 4 circles where they all cross perfectly in the middle. And the 4 are what you're good at, what the world needs, what you love doing, and what you can get paid for. And they're like, that's where it's a situation where 3 out of 4 kind of is bad, because if you're lacking any one of those, so it's like you're paying attention to those. And if you apply those to a job or a profession, you can get paid for those things because those things have value. So these things kind of make sense.
Yeah, it does. And it's been shown, I mean, that idea, and it's really interesting. I wasn't familiar with the Japanese model, so I'm going to go back and find out some more about that. But I mean, this model of psychological need satisfaction has been shown across industries, across settings, across cultures. Like, it's just one of those, there's very few things in research that like hold up consistently, but it's definitely one of those, items.
Anything surprise you? I always like to ask people who do research, because you spend a lot of, what people don't see when they're not standing next to the poster or listening to a presentation or reading a paper is all the stuff that went into that. So anything surprise you or shock you when you were doing it? Anything past the eyebrow test what made you go, ooh, that's interesting?
Yeah, probably the 2 things were, one, what we talked about with the negative effect of lifelong learning. Our initial reaction was, hey, what's going on here? This is not what we expected. And then the other thing was, we talked about organizational engagement. We also looked at professional engagement. And so are you, and it sort of gets to the professional identity and who you are and these things. And one of the things we were testing was, is engagement and different things different, right? So are you just an engaged person or not an engaged person? Are there different loci of engagement?
Okay, what'd you find?
And we found that, they were different, that professional engagement and organizational engagement did not interact with each other. They were totally separate things. But interestingly, and the part that raised our eyebrows, was there was not a lot of effect from professional engagement on career satisfaction or intention to stay.
Say that again. So professional engagement didn't affect career engagement?
Yeah, there was no significant relationship between professional engagement, career satisfaction, and intention to stay. And we're not sure what to do with that yet.
Right.
Our question immediately is, okay, well, what does it affect? Right. But what we did see was that professional engagement and lifelong learning characteristics, those were very strongly associated. So, part of it might be, are individuals who are lifelong learners, are they looking to their profession to meet some of those
fill the void.
Needs?
Right.
Is that different in those who are getting it met in their organization versus not? We don't know, but those are some of the questions that come up.
I've heard it before from people within APTA. I've been on committees, and some people they'll join. They're cyclical joiners. Committee. They get over committed. They're not getting what they need, and they keep scrolling, like doom scrolling. They keep looking for it and not getting it, and eventually they burn out and they leave.
Yeah.
So the question always is, and I know APTA has done this, which is, what are people looking for? Do we provide it? No. Can we? Or do we provide? And this was the kicker. I used to talk to some of the communications people, like Jason Bellamy. He's like, a lot of times we do provide it, they just don't know about it, and that's a communications issue. So sometimes it's there in the organization, but you don't know about it. Tom, you're sitting here looking and listening to this. Your role sort of is on the. This is of interest to you when you see research like this. When you're absorbing this, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's hugely important. We were preparing for kind of this podcast and just so happened to be scrolling through kind of the PTJ blast, and I was like, oh my God, we need to talk to Raine. Because it's an emerging area in research. The only other piece that I really know about, and it kind of had that same spark, in terms of informing what I do on a day-to-day basis, is there was a poster presentation at the North Carolina APTA. It was a student poster at a High Point, so shout out to High Point and Lance. And essentially it looked at intention to stay in the profession was at risk when you had a high fear of losing out, which I think is probably somewhat closer to this kind of lifelong learning. There's some symmetry there, but it was guarded against by people who had high amounts of, essential professional orientation or high professional identity. So caused me to think, well, what are the things that PTs do that give them that high professional identity?
Right.
And I really think, PTs are smart. They really, really are. If anything, overqualified in some ways, in terms of getting in school. So it's a mix of that person who gets out, and if they're not practicing at their type of license, say, this is it.
Right.
So I think what are the things that get people beyond this is it? Well, it comes down to that organizational engagement. I feel like I'm learning. I feel like I'm getting better. I'm building my competence.
I move the needle here.
Yeah,
what I do matters.
I'm moving the needle. I have autonomy. Someone's not telling me what to do. I'm doctorally trained. What are you talking about? Like, I can make independent decisions for what's best for my patients. So I think that over-management sometimes really kind of affects that piece and that engagement. And then also they found was that folks that identified as a specialist in something.
Got it.
Specialist in vestibular, pelvic, sports, arms, whatever that is, seem to be protective.
What does that mean, protective? What do you mean?
Protective against leaving the organization.
Oh, got it.
Which we have a huge issue with right now. I mean, APTA has released some stats. Like, we had huge professional attrition over the last 2-3 years. That's not just unique to PT. It's in healthcare. It's in everywhere, right? The Great Resignation sort of thing.
Right.
We see that it's getting better, both internally and kind of at the meta professional level. APTA just released, that, hey, job openings are going down. There seems to be some better stickiness, things along those lines. But, hey, we really need to help people find that professional identity so they don't start questioning their decision. They don't start, doing the Instagram of all their peers and, probably I should be making more money. Wouldn't I be more happy if, a lot of times if you're not happy where you are, there's only so many things that you can change.
Right.
And typically your job is one of them. Either, hey, leaving the organization, going to another organization, or maybe, leaving treatment and patient care and going into another aspect of care. Certainly happens, or we see it all the time. And also that, maybe I would be happy if I were a day trader. Right. Maybe I'd be happier if I was a product tester.
You could launch a podcast. You could just do that.
You could do a podcast.
No
I mean, maybe we're talking to an expert on this piece. I think you've found a professional identity, though.
Right.
But it's about finding that passion, which you really, really care about, which you feel you're pretty good at.
Right.
And also you get that meaningful purposeness kind of coming through. So a lot of my job is just helping folks find that, right? And I love your point on the APTA, because a lot of these things we have in place, this challenge always is in communication, making sure people know that they're there, that people utilize the resources that are there, because I think generally everyone acts from a place of, we've heard you, we did this, but a lot of times that message doesn't come across. People say, oh, it's the same, there's nothing for me, I'm going to go seek this satisfaction, fulfillment, and engagement somewhere else.
But all right, so now you're listening to what Raine is saying, and you're like, okay, I'm seeing this, but he's, validating it. I use the Ikigai to launch a podcast and figure out what I do, right? That's a unique thing. But you've got to do it at an organization or an APTA, an association, or any company. You've got to do it at scale for people, right? You can't spend time running around sitting down with Jimmy. Jimmy, let's draw 4 circles and figure out what you like, right? You've got to look at it profession-wide across not hundreds, but thousands of people. How does an organization like ATI do that now, knowing that programs that are robust and meaningful take time to develop, and you're developing the right things? How do you plan that? How do you create that?
Yeah, the first thing is you ask. You ask what people are looking
smart.
for. They don't always know,
but
with some questioning, you can kind of get a sense of things. But a perfect example is what we already talked about, mentorship. When we were kind of last talking, hey, I want mentorship. Okay, well, we have this mentorship program. Well, I don't want that. There has to be that. Well, what does that mean to you? What does that look like? And when you talk about at scale, it's about being flexible, not rigid. Right? You can't have 2,000 different programs, but you can have a program that's super malleable based off what it is that someone's looking for. Because when we say mentorship, it's probably a third. A third of people are really looking for, hey, I have some clinical feelings of I'm not doing kind of what I should be. Like, that's when I say mentorship, I mean I want someone to do skills with me. I want clinical reasoning. I want to talk through patients. There's another third who are probably like, I feel pretty good with the patient part, but maybe this whole documentation thing, maybe struggling with authorizations or any of the millions of barriers that our clinicians, encounter on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And then there's a third where you kind of just got to, hey, let's figure this out together, because you're not giving me enough to kind of figure it out. I feel that you're at risk. You're kind of telling me you're at risk, but you feel okay clinically. You feel okay with this other aspects. Sometimes it's things that are outside of work. Certainly that does come into play, but maybe it's like kind of life. Maybe it's time management. Maybe it's just all these different aspects that people feel pressure for. But at scale, you can't be restrictive. That's a big lesson I learned probably from 2017 to 2019 to post-pandemic. You have to design a program that can fit an individual or thousands of individuals. If you force into one program, inherently you're going to have some hits and you're going to have a lot of misses.
Right. But this is paying attention to what people are telling you. I bet you if you did this 10 years ago, would have said something different, right?
It'd be interesting to see. I'm not sure, but as I listen to you talk about that, it makes me think about our residency programs and where that's going, and that's one of the things that we saw. We just finished another study where we went around the country and looked at residency programs and exemplar programs, right? Yep. And what we saw in those organizations was that even if you weren't a part of the residency program itself, that learning culture that was there and that competence that people learned.
Collateral value.
And it looked maybe different for different people and different organizations did things, but it was very much, it sort of drove everyone's sense of learning and being a part of that organization.
That ambient culture of learning.
Some people aren't ready for it at that moment.
Yeah, even if it's not a program for me, I'm really happy you have that. Either because maybe I want to do it later, or I might want to do it later, or I just love being in an area where learning is important.
Right. Yeah. And this isn't my bag, but I'm glad that it is. But maybe a little later there will be, or maybe I'll change. I heard someone say, I don't read books twice. I just read a book, and I'm always proud of myself when I do read a book, but I don't read the same book twice. And there was a guy, Ryan Holiday. He's like the Daily Stoic, and he said, I read this book every year. I'm like, that's weird. He said, because the book hasn't changed, but I have. And that's kind of unique. So you might not like it now. You like being around the people, but eventually you change, and now that thing is still there. So, Tom, everything you're saying is nice, right? You're hearing the research, and this is, nice, research and practice. Usually you guys are you're like, but you don't understand me, and you don't understand me. This is nice in theory, but what would this look like in reality? What would creating something like this at an organization look like tangibly?
Yeah, I mean, just to call out a couple points, and a lot of iteration has gone in, right? If we're reflecting back 5 years, 10 years, where we thought we needed to be from a development engagement perspective,
right.
We're getting better every year. But, hey, part of it is getting off on the right foot, right? First impressions tend to last, right? What did I hear in the recruitment versus what am I getting in my first week? Super important. So, onboarding, we make it really, really, really critical. We really elongate. Orientation is over 50 days. Wow. Then you go into a mentorship program, and then you have the possibility of going into a certificate program. And all these things are free, they're optional, and things like that, but all of them are malleable and designed for the busy clinician, because work-life balance has become more important for folks, obviously. Our most recent kind of contribution here in terms of this ambient learning environment is we recently founded the Institute for Musculoskeletal Advancement. It's a 501c3 research institute that ATI is just getting underway, because we have a lot of data. We are fanatical about collecting outcomes. We have 3-point-something million patient cases beginning to end.
Wow.
We've leveraged it in a lot of research. I mean, call out to Chuck and Ellen and Adam and anyone through there. But you wouldn't believe how many full-time clinicians say, hey, you know what? I'd love to get some exposure in research. I'd love to, I don't know, maybe I did a research project when I was school or in residency or things like that, and I've kind of come away from that. So really we've designed this institute that there is a position, there is a role for full-time clinicians to get paid, which is always a differentiator between volunteerism, to actually contribute to that research, whether it's in data analysis, whether it's in just cleaning, a lot of the unsexy things, right? Everyone sees publications and presentations, but, oh man, the iceberg, right? There's 90% that doesn't go, and when you've been in a dark room trying to go through an Excel sheet for a long time, you kind of really realize whether research is for you or not.
Right.
But that's one piece where we can contribute to this environment of learning. We can engage people in a way, because that's what we were hearing. We were hearing, hey, I want to contribute to this. I know we have a lot of data. I know we do research, but how can I be a part of that? So the iMSKA is a huge part of that commitment.
But I don't have to go all. I hear I can try it a little bit. It's part of my job. It doesn't have to be my entire job, because I don't want to take a leap. That's too scary. But I sort of want to dip a toe in, and I want to make it feel meaningful. I don't want to just do it on the side. So it sounds like you heard a lot of that and made it possible. It can't be easy to coordinate, though. I mean, that's a lot of people, a lot of things, and it sounds like all you're doing is teaching, which is kind of fun.
Well, we're getting underway. I think we're going to learn a lot, obviously, but we've built the structure, built the position, we've filed, we have all these things going, and now we're really figuring that out. But you're right, the coordination piece of, okay, this is a part-time person, this is someone willing to give me 8-10 hours a week.
Right.
Hey, we have these existing lines of research. We know these are the tasks and things that need to be done in order to go from a good question to a research output. You're right, it's a lot of teaching, but especially when you're doing teaching at scale, all of a sudden, that investment really pays it forward and pays off, and,
right.
and we're really excited for what this holds for us. One, for engaging these individuals, also continuing to add to kind of the scientific knowledge that's out there, but also opening up partnerships. ATI has a long history of research, but as a for-profit institution, we've had some folks that, hey, that's not, or certain grant funding that's been unavailable to us, going this route and really saying, hey, we're doubling down on our research and our education. We think just is going to pay off in all of those areas.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. Like, as I listen to you talk about that, I hear all those parts, right? You have clinicians who now sort of have choice in what they do during, as part of their job, right? There's some clinics, some research, things. You're supporting them in becoming competent in what they're doing. You're giving that smart, just saying, okay, go do some research, right?
Well, that's under supervised, and people like that hate that as much as micromanagement.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And then and then especially having this center and all these people that are involved in it, they're now a part of something as they're doing that, and so you're really ticking off all three of the things from the psychological need, and 4 of the, I can't say the word that you said.
Ikigai. Yeah.
We're going to practice later on that.
This is kind of cool, and I love the serendipity of it. Is we were going to talk about iMSKA and all the importances, and I bet you we would have brought well, I'm sure that would play into someone's satisfaction and maybe them staying or not. And Raine's over here doing the research, saying these things contribute to this. It's like, hey, look, they're doing something that you had. This is a tangible example of that.